Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Proletarian. My name is Greg, and tonight I want to take a look at one last generic Chinese homage watch, at least for the time being. I've got some new stuff in already. I've got some new stuff coming in. I've got an incredible backlog of videos to be made. But this watch, I've had it about 10 months, and it's just too nice to pass over. I've been wanting to make a video about this for a while, and I want to squeeze it in now because I'm not sure this watch is staying around. But I am talking about the Parnis 44mm Flieger. Parnis is one of those generic trade names. It's not really a manufacturer. I think the Chinese government reserves it for the use of various watch assemblers to market their watches under, or something like that. But as I said, it's a really nice watch. It's really well built. It's been a fun watch to wear, and it gets a lot of positive comments, a lot more than some of my more expensive watches. So why don't we go over and take a look at it on the tabletop, and then I'll come back here and give you my final thoughts on the watch. So, super quick update here. Those of you who are knife enthusiasts and who follow the channel may have noticed that I neglected to give the promised update on the Kershaw Emerson CQC8K in my last video. Some of you might have been glad of that, seeing as the last video did turn out to be just shy of 42 minutes long. But I did promise it, and I have been carrying it every day. I've been using it pretty hard, so let's take a quick look, 15 seconds or so. The knife is holding up pretty well. The handle looks great. The locking is still good, although I've hammered on the knife a little bit. I've been cutting cardboard, corrugated cardboard, oak tag, and recently I've been cutting some thin sheet steel, cutting up some dog food cans, and I had to modify some tin cans for a project. I used the chisel tip in lieu of getting a real wood chisel to install a strike plate in a wooden door frame. You can see a lot of this very thin enamel has worn off, and even the black oxide coating has worn through in a couple of spots, I think from when I was pushing the blade through steel. The only real complaint I have so far is this 8CR14 MOV steel is not the hardest stuff on the planet. This knife is very easy to sharpen because you're only sharpening on one side and then taking a very low pass on the other side to knock the burr off. But it doesn't hold an edge very well. I don't know if that's a heat treatment problem or it's a problem with this cheap Chinese steel. So anyway, I just wanted to give a quick update. Let's get back to the watch. That's what most of you are here to see. All right, guys, so here is the Parnis 44mm Flieger, and it is a big watch. Now, 44mm is not enormous by today's standards, but this watch appears very large on the wrist. It's got a ton of wrist presence. As the name implies, the case diameter is 44mm, excluding this large onion crown. It's approximately 52mm lug to lug. The lug width is about 22mm. Well, it's exactly 22mm. And the watch doesn't sit super high off the wrist. It's not super thin, but it seems thin in comparison to the rather large diameter at only 12mm from front to back. Now, obviously this watch is built in the style of a mid-20th century pilot's watch. The dial takes many styling cues from the German Luftwaffe's World War II era Bayuhren watches. Watches built in this style today are popularly referred to as Fliegers oftentimes, which is why Parnis refers to this watch as the Flieger. Now, Flieger has been said to translate to pilot. In fact, it translates literally from German to English as flyer and is interpreted to mean airman or aviator. I suppose this is meant to sound a bit more interesting because the English word pilot translates into German as simply pilot or Pilot. So while this watch is clearly meant to resemble one of the Luftwaffe's Bayer watches, it is definitely not a clone. So those of you who are really opposed to clones, you can rest easy. As far as I know, all of the actual Bayer watches featured a central seconds hand, not this small seconds subdial. So the Parnis Flieger is probably most reminiscent from a styling perspective of IWC's current Big Pilot model. The Big Pilot does feature a small seconds subdial, but it's located at the 3 o'clock position as opposed to the 9 o'clock position on this watch. Overall, the watch is finished very nicely. The case is very nicely machined. The polishing is well done. The brushing on the sides is well done. The machining on this bezel ring is very nicely done. We've got a slightly domed crystal. Now, the crystal is one of the problems I have with this watch. Parnis advertises the Flieger as having a sapphire crystal. And I am like 97% sure that when I bought this off of eBay 10 months ago, it was advertised as having a sapphire crystal. When I look at the listing, the same listing today on eBay, it's shown as having a mineral glass crystal. And we can test this very simply. Here's my Victorinox Inox. This definitely has a sapphire crystal, and we test it with our cheap, not very scientific tester, and boy, yeah, that's way up there with 4 yellow bars. We're getting a lot of nice thermal conductivity there. We should get a similar reading from this watch if it is in fact sapphire. And we don't. We don't get any change in the reading at all. I might as well be holding it up against a piece of plastic. Now you might say, well, you bought a cheap, no-name Chinese watch. Did you really expect it to have sapphire? Well, here's a cheap, no-name Chinese watch, which was advertised as having sapphire, and guess what? It's got a sapphire crystal. So I don't think it's too much to expect even no-name Chinese watches to stand up to their advertised standards. So that was a bit of a disappointment. One weird thing is, I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up in this light, but despite the fact, and one of the reasons I was really convinced that it was sapphire when it first came, and I was so impressed with it, was the anti-reflective coating on the glass. I don't know if you'll be able to pick up that blue tinge. When I hold it this way, obviously it's kind of hard to kill the glare from those overhead lights when I have it in this position, but here it should be showing a lot more reflection from the lights behind me, and that's largely killed by the anti-reflective coating on the glass. Why Parnis, or whoever made this watch, does that, I have no idea. Glass is much closer to the refractive index of air and generally doesn't require an anti-reflective coating. And oftentimes, even cheap sapphire crystals don't have an anti-reflective coating. I mean, look how much glare is coming off of this watch. So why they would have put an anti-reflective coating on a glass watch crystal that doesn't really require it, I have no idea. That's one of my biggest peeves about this watch. Almost everything else is very nice. It's got a really lovely leather band, nicely finished, oil-finished leather, very nicely stitched. It's got a deployant clasp that works very well. So then we come to the movement inside this watch. It's advertised in most eBay auctions for most of these watches simply as a 6497 movement. And that would seem to indicate that the movement is a clone of the ETA Unitas 6497 watch movement. And that is kind of true. It is in fact a clone of the Unitas 6497, but as modified by Panerai to become the Officine Panerai OP11 movement. So that's really what this is more or less a copy of. But it's pretty nicely done. It does have a swan neck regulator spring and screw there. Too bad they didn't put the anti-reflective coating on this exhibition case back. There's the swan neck regulator spring and screw. I paid extra for that. The movement is very nice. It keeps fairly good time. It's gaining about 12 seconds a day or so. This is, of course, a hand winding movement, and it winds with really buttery smoothness. There's absolutely no grit or resistance in winding it. Very, very smooth. It's been running very reliably. Now, I don't wear it every day, but it runs quite reliably. So as I said, it's basically a clone of the Panerai OP11 movement. And the small seconds subdial at 9 o'clock on this watch is really what reflects the Panerai DNA of this movement, as Panerai started featuring a similar seconds hand on its Luminor models back in the 1950s. And the main change from the Unita 6497 is that the OP11 features that swan neck regulator that I already pointed out and redesigned bridges. That's how you can tell that this is a Panerai styled movement rather than the standard ETA movement. The reason that they used Panerai style variation of the Unita 6497 in making most of these watches is that the Chinese started cloning PAMs pretty much before any other 6497 style wristwatch. As a matter of fact, they become so skilled at building Panerai counterfeits nowadays that it's become an extremely risky endeavor to purchase Panerais from any source other than a Panerai AD, unless the buyer is very knowledgeable about differentiating between original and counterfeit watches. Now, this movement wouldn't fool any Panerai collector, but if you took this same movement and finished it to a higher standard, which the Chinese do in some of their more convincing counterfeits, it can be really hard to tell the difference. The nice thing about these movements is they're essentially small pocket watch movements. Very, very similar, only 17 jewels. They've got very large, robust parts. There's not a whole lot to go wrong in there. I mean, this is a tractor engine of a watch movement. And they really work very nicely in this application. So I guess I don't really have an awful lot more to say about this watch without wasting your time. I like it. It's pretty nice. Why don't we head back over to the bookshelves and I'll give you my ultimate thoughts on the watch. So overall, I think the 44mm Parnis Flieger is a really cool watch. It's a very popular style right now, these Flieger watches. It's a fun watch to wear. It is big at 44mm. It's not huge, but it's got a lot of wrist presence. I think one of the reasons it looks so big is that so much of the case area is occupied by the dial. The large numerals and indices, the big hands, it just really sticks out. And again, it does look an awful lot like an IWC Big Pilot. And it really grabs people's attention. I have gotten more unsolicited compliments and positive comments on this watch from people I don't know than any other watch I own, maybe all of my other watches combined. Every time I wear this watch out in public, particularly, in a t-shirt or with short sleeves, somebody ends up saying something about this watch. Now, I don't know if they just think it suits my style. I don't really think it does, which is why it's going to be moving on down the road. But it is a really cool watch. One thing I don't think I've mentioned yet is it's a fairly loud watch. After 7 or so years in the artillery and another 20 to 25 years working around heavy machinery, my hearing is shot. Usually, if I've got a mechanical watch on, I've got to press it right up against my ear and kind of concentrate to hear it ticking. This thing, in a quiet room, I can hear it ticking from 2 feet away. This watch ticks like a time bomb in a Pink Panther movie.
Special delivery, a burn. Were you expecting one? A burn?
I will put it up next to the microphone here to see if maybe you can hear it ticking. It does look like it's registering on the microphone. Anyway, it's pretty darn loud. But once again, it's not really for me. I've had fun with this watch, but it's moving on down the road. But if you like this watch and you're thinking about buying one, I can't come up with a good reason for you not to do so. I've had nothing but good luck with this watch, and it really is, for the price, unbelievably nicely manufactured. As a matter of fact, if you bought one on eBay, you might have this very watch. You might even be wearing it as you're watching the video. That'd be pretty cool. If that's the case, wear it in good health. I hope you enjoy it. For the rest of you, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you guys know the drill. Subscribe, like, click the bell icon, share, tell your friends, and when I post new content to the channel, I hope to see each of you here then. Later, guys.